The restaurant was one of the most exclusive in the city. White tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, and a wait list that stretched for weeks. It was the kind of place where high-profile politicians dined behind velvet curtains and CEOs toasted million-dollar deals. The staff was trained to spot wealth and status from a mile away. That's why, when a young woman walked in alone, dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, no one paid her much attention. She stepped inside quietly without any fanfare, her eyes scanning the elegant dining room. No cameras followed her, no security, guards flanked her, just one girl with a calm, observant gaze. The hostess barely looked up. "Reservation?" she asked flatly, as if already expecting the answer to be no. "Yes," the girl replied politely. "Under Pacquiao?" The hostess paused but didn't make the connection. She glanced at her tablet, brows furrowed, then motioned for the girl to wait. A few minutes passed. Other well-dressed guests were led in ahead of her. Some of them even stared at her curiously. She looked out of place, quiet, modest, unbothered. That's when a young waiter approached, tall, well-groomed, with a practiced smile, though it quickly faded when he looked her up and down. "Can I help you?" he asked, tone laced with condescension. The girl nodded. "I have a reservation. Just waiting to be seated." He gave a short, dismissive laugh. "Miss, are you sure you're at the right place? We have a dress code here." And well, he stopped short of saying it, but the message was clear. She just smiled slightly. "Yes, I'm in the right place." The waiter turned away, muttering under his breath. Another staff member whispered, "Probably someone trying to sneak a selfie in here." A couple dining nearby chuckled quietly. Still, the girl waited gracefully, patiently. She didn't argue, didn't lash out, but she noticed everything. The waiter passed by again and added with a smirk, "Look, the bistro down the street serves decent food too. Might be more your style." She looked him straight in the eye for the first time, not with anger, but with a quiet confidence that made him blink. "I'll wait," she said. The hostess finally returned, flustered now. "Oh, you're with that Pacquiao," she stammered. "Right this way, miss." As she was led to the best table in the house, heads turned. The couple that had laughed looked embarrassed. The waiter froze mid-step. It hit him all at once. He hadn't just brushed off a regular girl. He had insulted the daughter of Manny Pacquiao, the world champion, the senator, the man who had come from nothing and built a legacy across continents. And she had said nothing because she didn't need to. But someone else was about to say something. And when he walked through that door just a few minutes later, everything in that restaurant would change forever. The restaurant's atmosphere shifted the moment he walked in. There was no media entourage, no flashy entrance, just a man in a simple, neatly pressed shirt, walking with the calm confidence of someone who had faced far greater battles than rude staff or expensive menus. Yet the moment Manny Pacquiao stepped into the dining room, even the chandeliers seemed to shine brighter. The hostess gasped, the chef peeked from the kitchen, and the waiter, the one who had belittled Queenie just moments before, stood frozen, tray trembling in his hands. "Good evening," Manny said warmly, as if greeting old friends. "I'm joining my daughter." His voice was calm, gentle. But to those who knew his story, who had watched him rise from sleeping on the streets of General Santos to becoming one of the world's most respected champions, it carried the weight of 1,000 fights. The staff scrambled, napkins were folded, water was poured. Suddenly, Queenie was no longer the girl in the hoodie. She was the honored guest. But Manny saw everything. The nervous glances, the flushed faces, the fake smiles, and most importantly, he saw his daughter's eyes. They told him everything. He took his seat beside her, gently placed his hand over hers, and gave her a smile, the kind only a father who has watched his child grow strong could give. Everything. "Okay," he asked softly. Queenie hesitated. "Yeah," she whispered. "Now it is." Manny nodded. He already knew. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand to see the manager. But when the waiter approached with forced politeness, Manny looked up, and for the first time that night, his tone changed. "What's your name, son?" The waiter blinked. Carlo, sir?" "Carlo," Manny repeated. "Nice to meet you." It was quiet. Too quiet. "You know, my daughter came here early, reserved this table herself," Manny said, his voice steady. "She didn't ask for special treatment. Didn't expect anyone to recognize her. She just wanted to have dinner in peace." Carlos swallowed hard. "Yes, sir, I didn't realize." "That's the point," Manny interrupted, though his voice remained calm. "You didn't realize who she was? So you thought it was okay to judge her, to humiliate her?" The staff shifted nervously. Other guests tried not to stare, but everyone was listening. But here's the thing, Carlo, Manny continued. You don't treat people with respect because of who they are. You treat them with respect because of who you are. Silence. Silence that echoed louder than any punch Manny had ever thrown. The waiter stood ashamed, unsure what to say. And by the way, Manny added casually, this restaurant, I'm a majority shareholder. I don't advertise it, but I helped build it to give people jobs. Good jobs, not to make people feel small. Carlos's knees almost gave out. The hostess looked like she might cry. Manny looked back at Queenie and gave her a quiet nod, an unspoken affirmation. You stood with grace. Now let me handle the rest. Then he looked back at Carlo and said something even more surprising. Everyone makes mistakes, he said, but what matters is what you do next. Go take a break. Think about it. Come back with a better heart. The waiter nodded, speechless, and stepped away. Manny turned to Queenie. Let's eat. It wasn't anger that changed the room. It was dignity. It was the power of a man who had been underestimated his whole life and had learned that strength isn't about revenge, it's about response. As the kitchen rushed to send out their finest dishes, Manny leaned back in his chair, his eyes warm. Because this wasn't just dinner, this was a lesson, and it had only just begun. The kitchen just moments ago, alive with the usual Friday night rhythm, had gone eerily quiet. The head chef, Antonio, stood by the pass window, frozen in place. He'd overheard enough to know something big had just happened in the dining room. A young server rushed in wide-eyed. Did you hear? She whispered. That's Manny Pacquiao. The girl was his daughter. Antonio's ladle clattered to the counter. Meanwhile, Carlo, the waiter, who had humiliated Queenie, stood just outside the dishwashing station, staring at his own reflection in the steel surface of the prep counter. His apron hung heavy around his neck. Moments earlier, he'd believed himself superior to the quiet girl in a hoodie. Now he realized he'd looked down on a daughter of one of the world's most beloved figures, and more importantly, a father who had responded not with rage, but with grace. He could have fired me on the spot, Carlo mumbled. Yeah, muttered another server, and no one would have blamed him. In the dining room, the mood had shifted. The staff moved with sharper focus, no longer just trying to serve food, but to redeem themselves. Dishes arrived quickly, plates were arranged perfectly. Water glasses never ran dry, but Manny didn't seem interested in any of it. His eyes were on Queenie. She still hadn't said much. Her usual fire was dimmed, but it hadn't gone out. Manny saw it in the way she sat tall, the way her hands remained folded in her lap, calm, composed. You didn't deserve what happened, he said gently, cutting into his steak. But I'm proud of how you handled it. Queenie looked up, tears threatening. I almost said something. I wanted to scream, but I thought, what would you do? Manny chuckled. I've yelled at people before, trust me, but sometimes silence is stronger. You gave them nothing to use against you. A soft smile returned to her lips. For the first time that evening, she began to feel like herself again. But deep in the kitchen, the guilt was boiling over. Chef Antonio slammed down his knife. I need to talk to him. You? The sous chef asked. I've cooked for mayors, diplomats, never said a word, but this. He paused. He didn't just humble the staff, he taught us something. Outside, Carlo had returned nervously, holding a note. Trembling hands betraying the emotions rowing inside. I wrote something, he stammered, approaching Manny's table cautiously. I know it won't fix what I did, but Manny looked at him kindly, setting down his fork. Carlo handed the note to Queenie. She opened it. It wasn't fancy, just a few words scribbled on an order pad. I judged you without knowing you. I'm deeply sorry. Thank you for showing more grace than I deserved. Carlo, for a moment, Queenie said nothing. Then she folded the note and slid it into her purse. Thank you, she said quietly. That means something. Carlo looked relieved. But before he could leave, Manny spoke again. Carlo? Yes, sir. This restaurant. How long have you worked here? Almost 3 years. You like it? I do. I've just made some mistakes. Manny nodded. Mistakes don't define us. What we learn from them does. Take tonight seriously. Grow from it. Then he smiled gently. You've got a second chance? Use it. Carlo nodded slowly. I will. Just then, Chef Antonio stepped forward, wiping his hands on his apron. Mr. Pacquiao, he said respectfully, would you join me in the kitchen for a moment? I want to show you something. Manny raised an eyebrow, curious. Sure. Queenie looked surprised as her father stood up and followed the chef behind the swinging doors. Inside the kitchen, the staff had lined up, not with fear, but with silent admiration. Manny Antonio began, "We heard how you handled everything. You didn't just defend your daughter, you reminded us all who we're supposed to be, and we want to apologize, not just to Queenie, but to you." The cooks nodded. Dishwashers, servers, line cooks, even the busboys all looked remorseful, but sincere. "You didn't have to come back here," Manny said, touched. "But you did. That means something." Antonio stepped aside to reveal a small cake. Someone had quickly put together from available ingredients. Piped in icing were the words to Queenie, "You deserve respect." It wasn't elegant, but it was real. Back at the table, Queenie wiped her eyes as the staff wheeled it out to her. Everyone in the restaurant began clapping, not because of her last name, but because of her strength. The next morning, the restaurant's social media page, usually quiet except for lunch specials and weekend brunch announcements, lit up like wildfire. A single post had gone viral. "Last night, boxing legend Manny Pacquiao visited our restaurant with his daughter. A waiter insulted her, unaware of who she was. Manny didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand anything. He treated the staff with dignity and left us with a lesson we'll never forget. We are deeply sorry and profoundly grateful for the way he handled it." The post included a photo, Queenie sitting calmly at the table, a small cake in front of her with frosting that read, "To Queenie, you deserve respect." Within hours, it was shared thousands of times. Major news outlets picked it up by afternoon. Manny Pacquiao teaches a lesson in grace after daughter is disrespected. The power of a quiet response. How one father changed a restaurant culture. But the headlines weren't sensational. There were no clickbait scandals, no lawsuits, no anger, just a powerful, quiet story about dignity and a father's love. Meanwhile, at the Pacquiao household, Queenie sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through comments on her phone. Some brought tears to her eyes. "My daughter went through the same thing. Thank you for showing that our kids matter. Respect isn't about fame. It's about how we treat each other. Queenie, you're amazing. Manny Pacquiao just redefined what real power looks like." She looked up at her father, who was sipping coffee and scanning a newspaper with little interest in the online buzz. "Dad, it's everywhere," she whispered. "People are really listening." He nodded with a soft smile. "That's good. But don't let it distract you. Let it remind you. Remind me of what? Of that how we respond to pain defines our strength. Anyone can throw a punch. Not everyone can lead with peace." At the restaurant, changes were already underway. The manager gathered the entire staff that evening for a team meeting, not to scold, but to reflect. "We failed a customer," she admitted, "but more importantly, we failed ourselves. Not because we didn't know who she was, but because we didn't care who she could have been. From now on, that changes." A cultural sensitivity consultant was hired. Monthly training sessions were scheduled. Every new hire would now be required to attend a seminar titled "Respect Before Recognition: Why Kindness Comes First." Even the restaurant's uniforms changed. Staff now wore black pins with gold lettering that read, "Every guest deserves dignity." Carlo, the waiter at the center of the storm, didn't quit. He stayed. He worked harder. He asked questions, apologized again, and began mentoring newer staff on how to handle guests with empathy. "I messed up," he told one trainee, "but that family gave me a second chance. So now I make sure no one here forgets what that means." In a week, Manny received a call from the restaurant's owner. "Sir," the man said nervously, "I just want you to know we're doing everything we can to make things right, and if you'd consider it, we'd like to invite you to be a silent partner. You don't have to put up any money, just lend your name, help guide our culture." Manny paused. "I'm not interested in business." The man's heart sank, but Manny continued, "I am interested in helping places become better." And with that, he agreed, not for profit, but for principle. Meanwhile, around the world, the story had reached classrooms and boardrooms alike. A teacher in California printed the news article and used it as a lesson in her 8th grade class. "What does leadership look like?" She wrote on the board. In Dubai, a corporate trainer opened a diversity seminar with a slideshow featuring Queenie's story saying, "Respect isn't earned after fame, it should be given from the beginning." A father in the Philippines told his son over breakfast, "You see, that's a real champion. He protected his daughter with calm, not chaos." Back at home, Queenie finally opened her journal, the one she hadn't written in for months. She wrote just one sentence that night. "I thought I was invisible, but my silence turned into a voice louder than I ever imagined." She didn't need revenge, she had influence, and now she was determined to use it. The days that followed were nothing short of surreal for Queenie. What began as a humiliating moment at a restaurant had become a national conversation. Not about celebrity, not about scandal, but about respect. Something so basic, yet so often missing. At first, Queenie wasn't sure how to respond. She had always preferred staying out of the spotlight even though she was born into it. But now messages were pouring in. Students, teachers, activists, even celebrities were sharing her story and tagging her name. She opened one message from a girl in Cebu. "I'm not rich or famous, but I've been treated like I'm less than others because of how I look. Your story gave me courage." Another came from a waiter in Canada. "We were trained to prioritize the rich and ignore others. Now I see how wrong that is. Thanks to you, I'll never treat anyone that way again." For the first time, Queenie realized this wasn't just her story anymore, it was everyone's. One morning, as she was leaving for school, her father approached her with a warm smile and a crisp white envelope. "You've been invited to speak at a youth leadership summit next month," he said. "They want you to talk about your experience, how you handled it, how it changed you." Queenie's eyes widened. "Me speak in front of people?" Manny chuckled. "I've fought in front of millions, but nothing is scarier than public speaking. Still, if you have something important to say it." At first, she hesitated. What could she possibly say that hadn't already been said? But later that night, while reading more messages from people impacted by her story, something clicked. This wasn't about retelling the incident. It was about giving people permission to speak up, to be seen, to demand respect. She said yes. At the summit, Queenie stood behind the podium, visibly nervous. Her palms were sweaty, her voice uncertain at first, but then she looked out into the audience and saw them. Students her age, some younger, some older, all listening, all waiting, all hoping. She took a deep breath. "I didn't ask to become a symbol, I just wanted to be treated like I mattered. But I've learned something important. When we speak with kindness, when we act with dignity, our voice echoes far beyond the moment." The crowd leaned in. "What happened to me happens every day to people without cameras watching, without anyone famous beside them. So if you've ever felt invisible, ignored, disrespected, I see you. You matter." When she finished, the applause was thunderous. People weren't clapping for a celebrity's daughter, they were clapping for themselves, for every time they stayed silent, for every time they wished someone like Queenie had spoken up before. After her speech, something unexpected happened. The summit organizers created a new initiative inspired by her words. It was called Stand Seen, Voices of Respect, a youth-led campaign promoting dignity, empathy, and inclusion in schools, workplaces, and public spaces. Queenie was named the honorary ambassador. Soon, schools across the Philippines and Southeast Asia began holding Respect Days. Restaurants put up signs pledging to treat all guests equally. Influencers joined the cause, sharing their own stories of being dismissed or stereotyped, all because one girl stood her ground with grace. But not everyone was happy. Some critics accused the campaign of being overhyped. Others said Queenie was only getting attention because of who her father was. She heard the whispers, she read the comments, but instead of responding with anger, she doubled down on the message. "This was never about me," she said in an interview. "It's about what we all deserve, basic human respect. If my story helped someone else feel heard, then I'll keep telling it." It wasn't about going viral anymore. It was about building something that lasted. Back at home, Manny watched from the sidelines, not as a boxer or a public figure, but as a father. He had trained his body for decades. He had stood in front of roaring crowds, but watching his daughter quietly lead a movement. This was the proudest moment of his life. "She's doing what I could never do with my fists," he said during an interview. "She's changing minds." Just when the dust seemed to settle, a new video shook the internet. A woman, elderly and plain clothes, was refused service at an upscale restaurant in Makati. She had walked in politely, asked for a table, and was turned away. "We're fully booked," the host had said. But moments later, a well-dressed couple was seated without a reservation. What made the video go viral wasn't just the blatant discrimination. It was the quiet, heart-wrenching line the woman spoke as she turned to leave. "I thought maybe today I'd be treated like anyone else." The internet exploded. News outlets picked it up, influencers reposted it, and hashtags like "Dignity for All" and "Hush Respect Has No Price Tag" began trending, and people looked to Queenie. Her story had become a symbol. Now they wanted her voice again. At first she hesitated. She wasn't a politician, she wasn't a social justice expert, she was just a girl who'd had a painful experience and decided to speak up, but Queenie knew this wasn't the time to shrink back. She posted a simple, powerful message on her social media. Respect is not earned by how you dress, what you drive, or who you know. It is a right every person carries with them, always. The post went viral in hours, but more than likes or shares, it sparked action. Restaurants across the city began reevaluating their training. Several hospitality companies announced new inclusion policies. The organization behind Stand Scene began working on a training program specifically for service industry workers, backed by Queenie and supported by her father's foundation. Manny watched quietly, then stepped forward to offer support. "It's not about fixing one place," he said during a press conference. "It's about changing how we see people, not as customers or celebrities, but as human beings." As Queenie stood next to her father, she realized something. The world didn't need her to be perfect, it just needed her to care and to act. This wasn't just a movement anymore, it was a mission. 6 months had passed since that uncomfortable afternoon at the restaurant. What began as a moment of pain had transformed into a wave of change, and at the center of it stood Queenie Pacquiao. Now she stood backstage at the National Summit for Inclusive Leadership, where she had been invited as the keynote speaker. Around her were CEOs, educators, lawmakers, and young students. People from all walks of life gathered not just to listen, but to learn. As she adjusted the mic pinned to her collar, Queenie took a deep breath. Her hands were calm, her heart steady. She wasn't here as a victim anymore. She was here as a voice. When her name was called, the applause was warm but respectful. She stepped forward, not with bravado, but with quiet conviction. "I never expected to be here," she began, scanning the room. "But maybe that's the point. None of us plan to be the one who speaks up. It just happens when silence becomes too heavy." She told the story not just of the waiter, the humiliation and the fallout, but of what happened afterward. The hundreds of letters she'd received from young people who said they'd face the same. The restaurant workers who said they'd been pressured to treat guests based on image, not kindness. The school children who now had better support systems thanks to the national rollout of the Pacquiao Respect program. But what struck me most, she said, her voice growing soft, were the messages from people who said, "I saw what you did, and it made me speak up too." The room was silent, hanging on every word. We talk about legacy like it's something you build with power, money, or fame. But I think real legacy is what lives in others after you're gone. It's the courage you spark, the dignity you defend, the change you inspire. She paused, then with a small smile. "I got that from my dad." The audience erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, but Queenie didn't soak in the attention. She turned, stepped off the stage, and went straight to where Manny sat. He stood, tears in his eyes, not because his daughter had become famous, but because she had become exactly the kind of woman he hoped she'd be. Strong, kind, and grounded. "You made your voice count," he whispered as he hugged her. She smiled, whispering back, "Because you taught me what it meant to use mine." In the months that followed, Queenie's work expanded. She launched a foundation supporting underprivileged youth with leadership training. Her school mentoring program was adopted in over 50 schools nationwide. She spoke at forums not just about discrimination, but about empathy, compassion, and the responsibility that comes with having a platform. But she always said the same thing. When people called her brave, "I'm not brave because I spoke. I'm brave because I didn't let one moment define me." And in doing so, she helped countless others rewrite their own moments too.